We simply cannot discuss Ethiopian history, whether it is about leaders, monarchs, warriors, healers, athletes, innovators, or pioneers, without articulating the triumphs of the unrivaled women of Ethiopia and their everlasting effects on our nation. The mighty women of Ethiopia were not cheering from the sidelines. They were active participants in the fight for sovereignty and freedom. They did not hesitate to fight alongside the men and deserve the utmost gratitude and memorialization. We are proud, we are grateful, and we will forever immortalize their stories. While you listen to this podcast, remember the millions of Ethiopian heroines who are breaking barriers and inspiring communities, whose stories are never shared or celebrated. But also remember the millions of Ethiopian women suffering at the hands of gender inequality, stuck in vicious cycle of child marriages and gender-based violence. We need to fight for the empowerment of our women in need, actively advocating for their educational and economic opportunities in our respective fields. Ethiopian women are phenomenal, inimitable, and shape the physical, moral, and spiritual fabric of our society. Their presence and impact will be brought to light throughout this podcast series, where we will feature the lives of some of the most prominent women in Ethiopian history. Let the story begin.
Yeah, you guys, like it's amazing in terms of how we really respect and we really underappreciate, the female heroines, the ones who led troops and the ones who were, on the battlefield fighting against people, and the people who and the women who were powerful, elites, and all that sort. But I think what some of us sometimes really, and we talk about underappreciating, I feel like something that we kind of overlook is the fact that not all Ethiopian historical or really important women were necessarily wealthy or powerful, or people who were on a fighting lines. There were a lot of women who were ordinary women who were facing the struggle that Ethiopia society had really, set out for them, especially in terms of sexism, which of course had really, was a problem in Ethiopian society. And when we talk about Ethiopian society, of course, there was a multitude of different ethnic groups, and it was amalgamated of different cultures, of course, which I guess you could say affected women to a different degree than it did to other women from other ethnic groups. But yeah, there was a lot of women, ordinary women who were facing a lot of hardships and sexism. And we don't talk about the ones who rose up against that. They were the women who fought for their rights. They fought for equal rights, and they fought for equal opportunities, or not even necessarily equal opportunities or equal rights, but just having more of a say. They just wanted to have more rights than they did, that society simply didn't give them in their respective cultures. And one of the women that I feel like sometimes is really, really influential, but really nobody here knows about, is there's one woman named, and her name is Yaqeqe. And Yaqeqe is definitely, I know that a lot of people probably don't know about, but she is widely regarded as a pioneer in Ethiopian feminism, someone who fought for women's rights and equal opportunities in the central and southern parts of Ethiopia since at least the 19th century. So for those that don't know, just to give a bit of synopsis about her story. One thing about her is that she was pretty much a heroine in Gurage legends. She came from the Gurage ethnic group, and she was the one who really fought for equal rights and opportunities. So in the Gurage culture, specifically in the Sabat culture, which is where she came from, women were not allowed to own property. They were not allowed to attend assemblies or divorce their husbands. And anybody, pretty much Gurage women, who disobeyed their husband's commands, or they disobeyed these men's, they were branded with a curse. They were branded with a curse that was named Ankik. And one woman, her name was Yaqeqe, was married to a powerful warlord or a powerful figure in her community, and he was known to be, very wealthy. But he was known to be very unfaithful to her. He was known to cheat on her repeatedly, and he had different wives at the same time. So what she did was she basically divorced him, and that was just the first huge red flag in that the community, because you weren't allowed to divorce your husband. You were definitely, women were not allowed to divorce their husbands. So that caused a lot of shock in that community. And basically what happened later was that as she divorced her husband, some people tried to convince her into I guess kind of rekindle the relationship with her husband, her ex-husband, and everything, and she continued to refuse. And basically what it evolved into was a protest for a women's rights, and she started to rally other wives of the other figures in that community, and she started to protest about them and saying that we asking for more rights, and to saying that we to against the oppression that that was happening to women in society. And there was in Gurage culture specifically, there is a process, or there's a institution that is known as Yejoka in the Sabat Beit Gurage, and basically every week men would basically organize assemblies and discuss certain political affairs and everything, which women were forbidden to attend. And what she did was she managed to rally a lot of these women, and they went to this assembly, which they were forbidden to ever come to. And she took about at least 40 of these women, and they went and they demanded rights. Well, when I say demanded, they weren't out here just cussing at them or anything. They addressed them very respectfully. And I'm gonna quote a quote that she asked them at this assembly. Quote, "We women, your sisters, your mothers, and your obedient servants for all time appear before you today to ask for our rights, if we at all have any. We women are treated as if we are created only for the pleasure of men. You never make us participate in things you are doing or planning. We have no security. If you like us, we are lucky. We live with you, and when you dislike us, we are chased out empty handed. Therefore, we came here today to beg for some rights, even if it is not the same rights as for men. When we feel repressed to leave our husbands and go without being tied up by the rigid procedures of divorce, which remain to be based upon rigid customary laws and traditional beliefs, the ankit. When you divorce us, you just go say because you are not tied up by ankit. Let us have the same rights. Although we cannot tell you to go from your establishment, but for us to be able to say, I'm going and goodbye." So this speech that she basically spoke, was she that she held to these men at the assembly, outraged them a lot, and she was branded with this curse a lot. But through her persistence, she managed to basically convince them to allow her to divorce her husband. So all of this hard work she would do was just to be able to have a divorce. She'd be able to divorce her abusive husband. And eventually she started to go into practicing for more rights and more protesting against the rigid and oppressive practices that society treated them with. But there was a lot of conservative men who intimidated a lot of the women that she managed to rally behind, and basically she was completely to the point where she was left alone, and she was branded, and she was what tradition states is that she was struck by lightning as divine punishment for her disobeying the customary laws of the traditional settings of the Gurage culture at the time. But a lot of people think that, she was actually just killed. But it kind of just shows that how like women rights, people who were protesting for women's rights, even in these different settings, what you describe as these non-royal setting, not necessarily related to the royal courts, or people who were warriors or sub, or just these were just simple ordinary women, ordinary housewives, ordinary women protesting their rights against these patriarchal cultures and these oppressive cultures and society that they were facing for a long time. And of course, it varied from culture to culture just how oppressive these practices were. But it really just it was so it was something that was kind of swept under the rug basically in culture. But a lot of Gurage women specifically look up to her as a heroine in terms of that, because in terms of sexism, I think a lot of people regard the Gurage culture as being more patriarchal, more sexist towards women than, for example, Tigray or Amara cultures, for example. And of course, these comparisons kind of varied from culture to culture, but nonetheless, there was a standard that was to be held against a woman. And this was something that I never really knew about until I saw a play about her on YouTube. And they have, I think, biannual plays in the Millennium Hall in Addis Ababa. And this was something that I saw, and I never heard about this until I started to research about it and I started to try to find out more about. But it's one of those things where, like, being a heroine doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a crown, or it doesn't mean that you have to be someone who was fighting on the front lines. You could be someone who's simply fighting for rights, someone who was fighting for the well-being of other women. So this was something that I feel like a lot of people should know. And in terms of Ethiopian feminism, the feminist movement in Ethiopia, a lot of they're directed from the efforts of these pioneers from people who lived in like the 20th century and the 19th century, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's good to pay homage to that, because we do live in a patriarchal culture. Most of us, in general, Ethiopia, we do have ancient, history with an oppressing woman, and doing all of that. So I think would be really I think it's important to give homage to the people to women who fought for these rights, and especially on Women's Day. So that was something that really interests me, and I really think that we should definitely learn more about. And of course, there's probably a lot of different women who also fought for rights that didn't have a name for themselves necessarily also. But yeah.
Yes, Sami, thank you so much for mentioning Yaqeqe. She's also one of my favorite Ethiopians. I also heard about her first when I watched the play. I can't remember the name of the play, do you?
I don't remember the play. I just remember seeing a play on the Millennium Hall. I just remember seeing that a couple of years ago on YouTube, actually. But that was when I wanted to find more about it, but I don't know the actual name. I think that maybe I think it's actually just named Yaqeqe, maybe.
Yaqeqe, yeah, maybe it was just Yaqeqe. It was very popular in Ethiopia when I was there one summer, and I had the chance to watch it. But yeah, I think it would be really great if Ethiopian artists and just like in general, if the media could present these legends and these icons in a creative way, because sometimes that's the only way we hear about them.
Yeah, like I saw there is a song that I saw about her that's dedicated to her, but it's a Gurage song that was dedicated to her, and I didn't know it was dedicated to her until I heard her name and I saw like there's a whole music video kind of depicting her efforts in terms of that. So I really think that if as more and more artists, definitely not necessarily just people who are Gurages, but Ethiopians in general, would display these heroines, these Ethiopian women, uh, to the point where people start knowing more about them, I think it would really be beneficial to us as a whole.
Yes, same. Her story really touched me. I was amazed that I never heard of her prior to learning about her recently. I feel like we need to tell these stories continuously as a society. We can't forget the sacrifice and strength of our ancestors, even though it's technically not as long ago. Think 100 years ago or so. However, because even now, like especially in rural places or even in urban places, there's still so many cases of abuse against women, of them not having equal rights, being subjected to a lot of pain by the hands of men. So she's basically advocating for the same things that we are advocating for now. So to learn about someone as strong and significant as her, especially hailing from the South, where stories of our people aren't really shared as much. It's so vital, and she's definitely an important historical figure. I'm just so inspired by her, and she's a source of pride for us. But I definitely can relate to what she advocated to before to what's happening now. Like even things as simple as or it's a controversial topic, no matter how controversial divorce is, that caused a lot of heat that she gained at the time by the hands of the men. But even now, when there are couples that get divorced, usually it's the women who get more flack. So we see that still, and also like a lot of discourse in Ethiopia talking about feminism as it's getting more popular. People attribute it to something that is a Western ideal. However, I feel like we need to respect our own history, our own people, because stories like her show that we have our own advocates, we have our own feminists going back in history, and their stories get erased. Like think about the legend of her getting struck by lightning, right? So when likely she was killed, right? Her friends were intimidated to be silenced. So imagine all the stories, all the amazing women in our history that couldn't even get continued to be told, right? Because it was erased. So that's why we really need to hold her story dear and be motivated to follow in her footsteps, I think.
Absolutely, and that's a really great point that you made. There's a lot of misconceptions that fighting for women's rights, or the concept of feminism as a Western construct, but that's simply not true, especially when you have people like this who predate any sort of kind of efforts in advocating for women that could have quote unquote been raised in the 1950s. But this story particularly was based in the 19th century, probably almost a century before that. And the matter of the fact is that Ethiopia as a country that was not colonized, and yet they still had practices that were oppressive to women, and they had practices that were openly fought against by native women themselves, because they were conscious of the fact that they were being wronged by society. And even the stigma of divorce, something even today we live in the 21st century, the stigma of divorce is something that affects women, that's more attached to women than it is to men. And even back then, the fact that she had to work so hard just to get a divorce from him, and she didn't even get anything. There's no compensation on her, because culturally why she couldn't get anything. But if the men divorced her, like her husband wanted to divorce from her, he could have done that easily, and he would have gotten compensation. But she had to work hard from that, let alone even think about getting a divorce. But then even after after she managed to get successfully divorced, she's managed to challenge these outdated concepts, and she kind of challenged these oppressive cultural practices of that society. Even being able to come into an assembly where men were talking, like women were not even allowed to attend, women were not allowed to do a lot of the things. Like she even, as I quoted, like she wasn't even trying to put herself as an equal. She didn't try to put women as an equal to men, but she just wanted to fight for more rights for them, not necessarily being equal to them, but just to be able to have the freedom of, or be just being able to get something out of it, because it was very oppressive, the standards that women like herself were facing in that culture, in that society, in that community at the time. When you talk about like the fact that the tradition is that she was struck by lightning because it was divine punishment against her for rising up about this, it proves that like woman speaking out was seen as divine. Like she was killed by lightning. That was the treatment that she got because she rose up for women's rights. Whereas it's a lot of people probably assume that she was just killed, but the tradition is that her rising up deserved her being killed. So there was a lot of these negative stigmas that was very, very negative stigmas, very oppressive stigmas that was attached to women at this time, and still exist within. Even if you go to the countryside in Ethiopia, even today, these things exist. These things exist today. So I think when we give important to give homage to them, and to really tell their stories, not necessarily people who were come from like the northern part of the country, but those who come from the southern part of the country, like herself, someone who come from the eastern part of the country. You'll probably see a lot of these different stories. You'll probably see a lot of these different figures and a lot of these different examples of people who are fighting against these conditions. But it's just, if just trying to do the background knowledge, and then talking about it, and then normalizing and making people being more conscious of this. So I think that would definitely be it would help a lot, and also fighting off stigmas of the fact that Ethiopian feminism wasn't a thing until Westerners made it, etc., etc. Well, no, because they had women, native Ethiopian women, who are fighting against these conditions. A lot of these Ethiopian figures, Ethiopian women like Taitu, Mentewab, all of these different powerful figures were fighting against patriarchal men, patriarchal standards and stigmas that we're facing, but they managed to defy them and make something out of it. But they had that privilege of being part of the elite class. They had that privilege, as opposed to, for example, Yaqeqe, who was a simple woman. She was a simple housewife, and she managed to do so much, even in her society. So, elevating these women of these communities, regardless of where they come from in Ethiopia, would definitely be beneficial for us as a society, and as a society, be it men or women as a whole. I think it would be something that's it would be helpful for all of us, for all of our greater knowledge.
Yeah,
Wow.
definitely. I think saying that feminism is a Western ideology or a Western concept is very absurd, considering the fact that wherever there is oppression, people are going to stand up and fight for themselves. And that's what a lot of Ethiopian women have been doing. So I think it's just an excuse to shut down the conversation and shame women from asking for their rights.
And that's ridiculous. I mean, when I'm hearing about all these amazing, powerful women, like Yaqeqe's story is something that I had no idea about. And thank you so much, Sammy, for putting us on and teaching us that, because like it really expanded my knowledge. And it's just like you said, a lot of the women in our history had a lot of the privilege to be part of that elite class, but hearing about just everyday Ethiopian women that were, brave enough to stand up against patriarchy at that time, especially, is just amazing to me. And yes, when we go into the countryside and whatnot, there are, you have to understand, Ethiopia, when you go into the countryside and the rural areas, they're still practicing a lifestyle and a way of life that they have been practicing for thousands of years. So sometimes we also have to understand, okay, look, we have to look through their cultural lens and try to change things from the inside. And, you have to work together. You can't just come in there and say, oh yeah, this is wrong, et cetera, because it is, of course, 100% it is wrong. But we have to understand things from their cultural lens as well. But it's just incredible to me, hearing these stories, and no, it's literally, like you said, it is absurd thinking that feminism is a Western construct. Absolutely not. And the proof is in these stories here. And as Ethiopians, it's shocking to me that, some of our most iconic figures in our history are women. Arguably the most powerful monarch in our history is the Queen of Sheba. So we have no right to disrespect women at all, or even think women asking for more rights is absurd, because look at our history. Look at the powerful women in our history. We have to pay homage to them, like you guys said. And feminism is asking for, is believing in the equality of women. I don't understand why this is such a controversial topic. Like it shouldn't be. And I thank you for that story. And there's so many that we probably don't even know about. But wow, what an amazing, amazing woman.
Up next, we have Mentewab. She was easily one of the most influential figures in Ethiopia during her time. She was the wife and imperial consort of King of Kings Bakafa, aka the Unstoppable. We'll delve into how he got that name later. Mother of Emperor Iyasu II and grandmother of Emperor Yoas I. She was also known by the name of Birhana Munkasa, meaning glorifier of light, complementing her son's honorific of Birhana Sakat, he to whom the light bows. She served as regent during the reign of her son and tried to do the same during the reign of her grandson. She was responsible for arranging an important marriage with Princess Wabit, the daughter of Amizo, the chieftain of the Yedju Oromo. In order to accomplish this, she even went to the extent of banishing her son's first wife and their children. Interestingly enough, Amizo was the one who had afforded Bakafa refuge when he was fleeing his older brother, the then emperor's persecution attempts. Amizo was the one who, according to the explorer James Bruce, gave the young prince Misa the nickname Bakafa, meaning the inexorable, the unstoppable. This nickname would stick for the rest of his life. Now back to Yaqeqe Mentewab. According to Richard Pankhurst's The Ethiopian Borderlands, an amazing book which I highly recommend, in order to assure that her son would ascend to the throne after her husband's death, she sent the famous Dajazmach Warana, a commander of mainly Jawi, Darabi, Tulama Oromo troops, as well as some quote, Muslim riflemen, unquote, to guard Mount Wani. She did this in order to make sure that the princes imprisoned there would not escape and seize the throne, a common occurrence in 18th century Ethiopia. In fact, at one time in 1716, 50 princes escaped from the same fortress to lay claim to the throne at the same time. Emperor Ieyasu died in 1755. This led to a conflict between Yaqeqe, who wanted to continue on as co-ruler on behalf of her baby grandson, and Empress Wobit, who wanted a turn on the throne as well. Wobit summoned her powerful relatives from Yedju, and Mennen summoned Ras Mikael Sehul of Tigray, aka Ras Mikael the Astute, who was to become her son-in-law. In the end, Ras Mikael ended up seizing power for himself and assassinating the baby emperor. Oddly enough, he still went through with the marriage. Yaqeqe Mentewab built a castle as well as a large banqueting hall in the Fasil Gabi in Gondar. She also built a church dedicated to the Virgin Saint Mary and a palace in Kuskwam, where she lived out her days after the murder of her grandson and her fall from power. Oh, my bad, guys. I think I actually mistook Yaqeqe Mennen and Yaqeqe Mentewab, so I actually just mixed up their names. Yaqeqe Mennen was prominent during the Zaman Masafint, and we're going to cover her during a later episode. Sorry for the confusion.
Yeah, I mean, that was really great, Nati. I mean, Mentewab was a very influential figure in terms of the era of the era of the princes, or the Zaman Masafint, as it's known locally. In terms of her contribution, she was probably one of the most influential, or if not the most influential figure during that time, because as a woman, she had a considerable political sway over the court at Gondar, for example, as you remarked, Nati, of course, really well. And even in terms of the contributions that she made to Gondar today, there are monasteries that she built that still stands today. I don't know if y'all know a monastery that's known as the Kuskwam Gadam in Gondar that still stands. It's known to have very much healing properties because of the monastery that she built. And even today, she's one of the only Ethiopian women that's actually depicted in art. In Ethiopian art today, she's often depicted prostrating at the feet of Saint Mary, and this is something that you don't really see in Ethiopian art. Considering how patriarchal it is, you don't really see Ethiopian women being depicted like that, but she's being depicted, as a very religious, as a very pious woman. But also because, even her life, she was known to have very considerable political sway. She was known to control the courts. She was, mending relationship between her son and her son's, her daughter-in-law. And she was pretty much the architect in controlling the situation, and she was very much you could say that she was very she's probably the most important figure, I think, in terms of the Zemen Mesafint, not just in terms of women, but with men also. She operated with a lot of vigor. She was very much, she was very important, to say the least. And some people say that the reason why she was because of that was because she was said to have been a descendant of a Portuguese man. So they say that it's because of her supposed European ties, which this was a folktale that was said during that time, but it's definitely something that we kind of miss in terms of powerful Ethiopian woman figures in our political history, and she was definitely one of the most influential Ethiopian women of all time.
Yeah, for sure. Like uh when discussing like her son's reign, everyone would sort of point to her because she was the one responsible for appointing the governors of various provinces and whatnot, while he was more so concerned with buying horses and like silks from Persia and whatnot. So, her importance really can't be understated. And like I think I don't know, personally I wouldn't really refer to her as Zemene Mesafint, but rather like pre-Zemene Mesafint, since I don't know, I'd say like the Zemene Mesafint started because she fell and like Rasmi and so rose.
You're right. No, technically she wasn't part of the Zemen Mesafint, but that era, it pretty much started from her time, I guess you could say, because from the assassination of her son. Yeah, I guess you're right. She wasn't technically part of that, but yeah, no, like she was a very powerful woman. She was the regent of her son and her grandson's time, and she still had considerable political sway, even like in her old age. Like she was in her 70s, and she was still ruling with an iron fist. Like she had all that say, and even in terms of promiscuity, she was known to have a younger lover. His name was Melmeli Yasu. So this was something that was in Ethiopian society. That was something that was a no-no. Like that was something you'd see that older men, going with younger women, but she was very much the opposite. She was much older than her significant other. Her significant other was Melmeli Yasu, who was the nephew of her ex-husband, her dead husband. So there was like a lot of there was some tea that was spilling over there. It was pretty messy in the court at that time, but she really didn't care. She didn't give a.
Not like,
No.
but yeah, but not.
I had to keep it G rated. We have to keep it G rated.
Yeah. I'm dead.
That's good. That's
That's
beautiful.
it. But I don't think she was like the only one, because like a lot of what's it called, no, of the female nobility particularly, like would have younger sort of lovers and husbands and whatnot, like Yaqeqe Mennen, whose son was basically the ruler of all of Ethiopia, Ras Ali of the Yeju. She married like a Solomonic emperor when he was still like 16, and I think she was in her 40s or 30s or something. And I think that's pretty common, at least for more powerful women in Ethiopia.
From what I know, like her case was very different because like she ruled a lot back when her husband died. So Emperor when at a Bekafa died, that's when she started getting her sway. She started getting her own say in political power. And I think the fact that she was so defiant, she was so open with her arrangement with her dead husband's nephew, and that was something that was she was pretty open about, and she had children with him, and it was something that was pretty. It was definitely known, and a lot of people don't know. What some people don't know is that her marriage to Bekafa, and her marriage to his nephew Melmeli Yasu. Both of these marriages also pretty much led up to the ancestors of the what you would call the Gojami and the Tigrayan lines of Solomonic descendants. So both of her marriages to these men, both of these produced the ancestral lineages of the Gojami and the Tigrayan Solomonic lineages, respectively. For example, she married her daughter Aster to a warlord named Mikhail Sehul of Tigray, and then that produced what is known as the Tigrayan branch of the Solomonic descendants. And then her other daughter, Waleta Israel, was married to a Gojami man by the name of Yosedik, and that produced the Gojami branch of the Solomonic descendants of that province. So her marriage to both of these men, in particular, proved to be very influential and proved to be very important into the imperial dynasties and succession of these respective provinces. So she definitely, even after her death, she had significant sway. She was very important, even centuries after her demise. So that's something that I think that's really important that sometimes gets overlooked.
That was dope. So you're telling me that this woman was basically the genesis of the Solomonic lineages or monarchies or royalty of two major provinces in Ethiopia, and they are genetically linked essentially, and they come from the same house through this woman. So Tigray and Gojam.
That's correct. And whether or not it's based on factuality, I think is besides the point. It's the fact that they claim descendants from her specifically, or her children, her marriages to both Mebekafa and to Melmeli Yasu, and also considering the fact that she was known to have had Solomonic descendants through her own family line, not just through her husband, but through her own line. So they definitely, the fact that they both had claimed ancestry from her and her children goes to show like how important she was in terms of in her imperial status in Ethiopia at the time, and then even after, more than a century after.
Wow. See that? This is what we mean, like when we say, Ethiopia is so interconnected. Our people are so interconnected. There's probably more links outside of this, of course, but like I didn't know this, and we're talking about a link between Gojam and Tigray, so I think this just goes to show you, man, like as Ethiopians, it's not just black and white. When we talk about ethnicity or provinces, like our history is intertwined and intermixed, and this is just one of many examples, man. So appreciate that explanation, Sammy. That was dope.
Definitely. I had to think about, I had to remember their names because there were so many different children. There were so many different figures at that time, but it's really remarkable when you really read about it. And it's, even in terms of Ethiopian women at the time, there were so many Ethiopian women, but her status was definitely something that I think is often underappreciated, and not just underappreciated, but just generally not known. It's something that is almost remarkable considering how important she was in terms of her ancestry to all of these important houses, and her contributions in terms of religion and architecture in Gondar. There were castles that she built, and there was monasteries that she built that continue to be sites of a very important religious pilgrimage today. So I think it's the fact that a lot of us don't know, a lot of us, be it in the diaspora or in Ethiopia, we don't really know about her contributions other than, maybe just a reference to her name. I think, I think it's sad in a way.
Another famous Ethiopian female patriot was Shewareged Gedle, who was the daughter of the Grand Chamberlain to Menelik and the president of the Women's Association, and worked at the Red Cross. When the Italians captured Addis Ababa, she wept as the Italian flag was raised. When she was brought to court to explain herself, she said, quote, "Is my weeping alone a crime when I see my country invaded by alien people, my state collapse, and my country's flag replaced by another?" End quote. She immediately joined the underground resistance, where she would disguise herself in dirty clothes, and she would pretend that she was a beggar and would pass intel to the Patriots in the hills beyond the Italian defenses. She sold her father's land, and she used the profit to buy guns, ammunition, medicine, anything the Patriots needed. And she ran guns up north and tracked down hidden arms caches. She was essentially a one-woman wrecking crew. Now, during a surprise attack, the enemy hit her Patriot group hard. They held out for hours. She says, quote, "I fired as long as I could, but I was finally taken prisoner. My woman assistant was killed right in front of me," end quote. They chained her to a wall with manacles so tight that they made her wrists bleed and tortured her by electrocution, but she refused to give up any information. She says, quote, "They asked me why I had become a rebel, and I replied, the lion prefers the forest to the house," end quote. Shewareged Gedle was given the nickname the Ethiopian Joan of Arc.
Nah, that's really dope. Honestly, like, there's so many women heroines from the Ethiopian Arabia era that really were just underappreciated. That they weren't really known, you know. Whether it's Shewareged Gedle, whether it was so many other women heroes that I didn't even know until I started reading about it in books and accounts themselves. And one woman that kind of stuck out to me was the story of Yaqeqe, and what you were mentioning, Elsh, in terms of women wearing during the Second Italian War, women would go out to the front fields, and they would go and they would wear men's clothes. They would wear like the Arbenia clothes, like out here in Guerrera, warfare suits and attires. And she was really one of them, because she was really known for doing that. Because this woman, her name was Yaqeqe, was the great granddaughter of King Haile Selassie of Showa. So she was actually a princess. She was technically the niece of Emperor Minilik, but she was also the wife of a leading Dajjal against the Italian occupation, who was named Mentewab, or his name was Capitan Mentewab, who was the leader of the Arbenia efforts in Wallo. She was also the daughter of one of the Guragi chiefs, so she had a lot of imperial status. She had a lot of high connections with different regions in Ethiopia at the time. But what she was known for, because she was married to another patriot, or an Arbenia, was back when the Italians first invaded during the Battle of Maicho. She went up with her husband. She was supposed to stay down, but she went up with her husband. She marched up with her husband to Maicho, and they both fought up in that battle of Maicho, and they were dodging mustard gas, airfare. They were about here just really battling it hard. And she was known to wear like just men's attire. Like she was indistinguishable, and she had that traditional afro that you'd see from back in the 1940s and 30s. Yeah, that Ethiopian woman would wear. So she was almost indistinguishable, and she was known to be pretty built even. And when the Italians, when they were dropping mustard gas bombs and everywhere, and Ethiopian troops were forced to retreat, what had happened was that while her husband Mentewab was leading the resistance efforts in Wallo, she went down to south to Shawa, and she went down to south in Gurage area, and she went and she launched a lot of resistance effort from her own area, her own home district. So her husband was leading the resistance effort from his home region, and she was out here also fighting the resistance efforts from her home region. And she was known to be she was known to be like hella, very, very diligent. She was known to be very articulate. She was very organized and leading the resistance efforts against the Italians, cutting supply lines, doing everything, and they were working hard together. And they were married. They were very faithfully married for a long time. They were like the dream team, basically. And she was actually crowned. She was actually awarded a medal by Haile Selassie when he came back from exile because of that. So this is one woman that kind of stuck out to me, but not a lot of people know about her, to be honest. It's just one of those things. But women defied, especially during this time, women defied cultural norms. Women defied, in terms of just staying back home and cooking and doing all of that. No, they literally went out and they fought hand in hand. They went out, they took like AK-47s. They went out and they were just they were out here in the battlefield. Like they were not holding back. And she was literally one of them. Like her, Shewareged Gedle, all these people who were like, they were just leading them out. Like she was an embodiment of defying the patriarchal standards and the norms that you see even present. Even if you compare back then, where women's rights were not much of a thing back then, and comparing it to now, like she and so many others, they were really, really great examples of female heroines who really are underappreciated, I feel like, in terms of the contributions that women made to the resistance efforts, not just even on the battlefield, but they were out here nursing people, they were feeding these troops, they were out here, and they were also on the battlefield. So it's like they had multiple different, like, men were all on the battlefield too, but women are also on the battlefield, and they were cooking for their husbands, and they were healing people, and they were, they were doing a whole bunch of cutting supply lines, they were doing all that stuff. So it's a shame that we don't really appreciate their contributions. And I feel like it would be really important that we as Ethiopians and as Africans are like really kind of appreciate them and give them their acknowledgement and their contributions, because it's amazing what they did.
No, I wholeheartedly agree, man. That was incredible, man. Sometimes it's just we just don't know, right? And we don't know. You can't appreciate it, and that's what we're trying to do with this thing here. You create awareness, and these stories, and you have no excuse after knowing something like this. You have to pay your respects.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's also another one called Wezero Alamitu Makona. She was like really one of the many amazing Ethiopian patriots that fought during that period. She actually lost 16 relatives in the fight. She lost all of her male relatives, and all of them were involved like in the fighting. And she described like joining the fighting at the age of 15. So what she did was like fighting from the distance, shooting targets, throwing grenades. That's what they were mainly doing. But her mother was also described to like lead troops into battle like better than men. And she ended up actually receiving two medals. I think the 5-year victory medal and the the 5-year patriotic service medal and the Star of Victory. And she also took her father's medals even though he had died. And yeah, it's a crazy amount of sacrifice that like they put into it, because she describes the trauma that she had when she heard her dad had died. Because when he died, Emperor Haile Selassie was coming in fighting from Sudan, and the fighting got really fierce, especially in the south. So when he died, she was like, she didn't eat for days and months, and like, she went through something extremely traumatic, and like, she even describes like when they go into Italian fortresses and stuff, like near the Lake Tana, finding barrels full of skeletons and whatnot. And it's very insane what they had to go through, and it's very amazing that they prevailed throughout and like survive all that.
Yeah, see, like, we don't understand that freedom was not free, man. I think we really, really need to understand that 16 relatives she lost. Is that right, Nati?
Yeah, man, it's like, it's very insane. People lost their entire families during that period. My own great-grandfather fought and died during that war, but it's like 16 from one family is very insane.
Yes, man. Yeah, that's yeah, that's a sacrifice that, I mean, we have to acknowledge, and we have to understand, man. It's unbelievable. Wow. There are so many untold and unheard stories, and women were just instrumental to our freedom. And they were on the front lines, like Sammy said, but they were also cooking and nursing and whatnot. And speaking of nurses, actually, while this resistance was happening on the front lines in the motherland in Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was in exile in the UK, and with him was his daughter, Princess Tsehai, and she is an Ethiopian I greatly admire, and she's the daughter of the emperor. And during his exile in Britain, she ended up training as a nurse at the great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children in London, and she graduated as a registered nurse. Once the Italian Fascists were kicked out of Ethiopia, Princess Tsehai returned to our motherland, and she used what she learned to teach other Ethiopians about nursing. Princess Tsehai also, she married Lij Abi Abebe, the governor of Wallagga at the time, and she tragically died in childbirth in Naqamt in 1942. But she made such a huge impact on the British people during their exile, and many people were heartbroken over her death, and they ended up fundraising to help complete the Princess Tsehai Memorial Hospital in Addis Ababa. And that's just another legacy of an amazing Ethiopian woman. I think there's like footage of her out in the UK, and it seems like she was really loved. I mean, if I play a clip of it right here.
Tsehai, eldest daughter of the Emperor Abyssinia, is a fully trained nurse, and she is known to her friends in the hospital as Nurse Haile Selassie. She lives amongst them exactly like anybody else. Soon the princess will be able to leave for her own country with an ambulance unit, a gift from our people in answer to an appeal by Lady Barton, wife of the former British Consul General.
I mean, what a legacy, man. Just a beautiful person. And it's just tragic how things ended early for her in her life. But again, this is just another testimony to, Ethiopian patriots at that time doing multiple things on multiple fronts. And so pay homage. We're forever grateful.
And with this concludes this episode of our Historical Women series. Of course, there are so many other significant and powerful women throughout our history from all parts of the country that we haven't mentioned here, but definitely will be in the future, as this is just the first of many. So stay tuned for that, as well as for our next episode, where we will be taking on and discussing a brand new topic and theme. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Take care.